Hi guys, today we're going to be working out of the multiple choice packet and the short answer packet as well. But before we begin, I want to do some birthday shout outs to some people whose birthdays we've missed since being in quarantine. So happy birthday to Saja, whose birthday was on the 14th. Agatha, whose birthday was on the 14th as well. Daniela, whose birthday is March 16th. Erin, who had a birthday on March 18th. Jocelyn, also March 18th. Ian Whitney, whose birthday was the 21st, and then Jack Owens, whose birthday was yesterday. Happy birthday to all of you. I hope that you guys had a celebration in your own way at home, social distancing from all your friends. Okay, so let's begin. So we're going to start with question 14 in the multiple choice packet today, do 14 through 18, and then we're going to do some in the short answer. So let's go ahead and start with 14. It says the zeros of the function are. So I'm going to show you guys the way that they want you to solve this, or the way that you could solve it using like math, but then I'll show you the way you can do it using your calculator. So when you want to solve for the zeros, you want to think about factoring or the quadratic formula or completing the square or even graphing. But in this case, we're going to do one of those three algebraic methods. If this is factorable, which I can tell it is based on the answers they give me. If these are nice whole numbers, then I can factor it. So that's what I'm going to do. So I have this quadratic. I have a 2 in front, and I'm seeing, you always ask yourself first, is there GCF? Remember, it's GCF, dots, or trinomial, and trinomial. In this case, we're going to pull out a GCF first. So I can pull out a 2 first. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. Pull out a 2 from each term. When you divide each term by 2, what's left over goes in the parentheses. So I have x squared, and then negative 4 divided by 2 is negative 2x, and then negative 6 divided by 2 is 3. And then I have to keep going. Inside the parentheses, I have a trinomial. Okay, so I did GCF first. Now I'm going to do my trinomial. It's the AM method, what multiplies to negative 3 and adds to negative 2. Well, my only options for multiplying to 3 are 1 and 3. One of them has to be negative to add to negative 2. It's going to be, the 3 must be negative because you have more negatives here. So you're going to go ahead and drop your 2 and then set up your 2 parentheses, x and x. Signs are different, 1 plus 1 minus. The 1 is with the positive, the 3 is with the negative. Now be careful here. It'd be very tempting to then go ahead and choose C as your answer, but these are just your factors. Okay, you have to keep going by setting up your t-chart and setting each factor equal to 0. All right, so I'm going to show you what that looks like since I'm running out of room. We have 2 is equal to 0. Well, that's not true, so that cancels. That's my first factor there. Then I have x plus 1 equals 0, and then you subtract 1 over. X equals negative 1. And then x minus 3 was one of my zeros. X minus 3, or factors rather, and then you add 3 over, x equals positive 3. So my answer is actually A. All right, so just be really careful with that one. When they say solve for your zeros, you have to go one step further and set those factors equal to 0. All right, let's double check that using our calculator. This is where the strategy part comes in. Using my calculator, f of x means y equals. So plug the original equation into your y equals. So you can plug 2x squared minus 4x minus 6. And you can find your zeros in a bunch of different ways. I'm going to use my table and look for where the y is equal to 0. And there it is at negative 1 and at 3. All right, so that's going to be our strategy. You plug it into y equals and check your table for where y is equal to 0, and your x values then are your zeros. All right, question number 15. When solving the equation, they give us this equation by completing the square. So that's the method that they want us to use. Which equation is a step in the process? So let's go ahead and do it the way they ask, by completing the square, and then I'll show you guys how to check your work. Okay, so if I want to complete the square on x squared minus 8x minus 7 equals 0, I first have to bring my c, my constant, over to the other side. X is on one side, constant's on the other before you complete the square. So we're going to add over 7. X squared minus 8x equals 7. And then you go ahead, you take your b, that -8. The b is always the term next to x. Remember, if I'm looking at standard form, it's ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0. So I swung my c value over when I added 7 to both sides. Now I take my b, which is the number next to x. So that's what I mean by take your b, divide it by 2. You get -4. Take that -4 and square it. You get 16, and then we add 16 to both sides. So it's going to look like this. X squared minus 8x plus 16 equals 7 plus 16. Okay? You take that 16, add it to both sides. Then you factor your left side trinomial. So what you get when you factor it, now you could factor it by showing 2 sets of parentheses, but since we know that these are always going to match, I can do 1 set and square it and set that equal to whatever that is, which is 23. So this factor is always going to be, remember, it's this number up here. When you take your b and divide it by 2, whatever you have as that number, that's always what your factor is. Okay, it's always half of your b. So it's -4. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop because this right here looks a lot like some of my options. Okay, x minus 4 but not equal to 9, so I can cross out a and c. I have x minus 4 squared equals 23, which is what I have here. So b is my answer. All right, the other way you can do this to check your work is you can plug this equation. Let me see where my highlight is. I'll highlight it in yellow. You can plug your original equation into your y1, and then you can plug in this into y2, but before you do that, you have to get everything on one side. So I'd have to swing over my 23. So then it would be x minus 4 squared minus 23 equals 0. So I'm plugging in my original, and then I'll plug in this into my y2, and they should match. All right, that's the strategy for checking. So I have x squared minus 8x minus 7 in my y1, and then I have parentheses x minus 4 squared minus 23, and then you can check your table to see if your y2's match, and since they do, that means these equations are equivalent, which they should be if you've done the process correctly. So that's my strategy. It's the y1, y2 match strategy. Okay? So let's see if you guys can see that. There's my strategy right there. All right, question number 16. This graph looks a lot different than any graph that we have graphed in Algebra 1, but it's okay because we have a graphing calculator to solve this one. So it says, which equations represent the graph below? Okay, and they give me an option of 3 equations, and then they ask me, like, is it just equation 1, equation 2, is it 1 and 2, is it 2 and 3? So what you're going to do is check each equation one at a time to see if your graph matches. Be really careful. Some things to look out for is your zeros. Remember, your zeros are where the graph crosses the x-axis. So I have a 0 at -2, at 1, and at 3 on this particular graph. Okay? So if you're using your graph function on your calculator to check, just make sure that the graph on your calculator crosses at these 3 points. Or if you want to use your table, that will work too. Remember, your zeros are where your y equals 0, so you should see a 0 next to -2, 1, and 3 when you put that in your calculator, okay? There's both ways of checking that. So let's go ahead and do question 1. Do these one at a time. So do option 1 first, clear everything out. In your calculator, do x plus 2, close parentheses, x squared minus 4x minus 12, and then check that graph. So when I graph that, guys, see what happens. Okay, so this graph I have in my calculator does not look anything like the graph I have on in my packet here. It hits at -2, but it doesn't cross through like it should. It should be crossing through and going up. Okay, and it hits at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, which is not one of my options here. So 1 is out, which means A and C are out. So now, look at B has 2, and then D also has 2. So that's not going to help me eliminate. Let's check 3 so that we don't even have to check 2. because 2 obviously must work. So if 3 does work, then my answer is D. If 3 doesn't, then my answer must be B. So clear everything out. Let's plug 3 in. So x minus 1, close parentheses, and then x squared minus 5x minus 6. Go ahead to the, nope, just kidding. I don't want the table. I want the graph. Okay, so it kind of looks similar, however, not exactly the points we want. It doesn't cross at -2, it crosses at -1. It does cross at 1, but it doesn't cross again at 3, so this is not my graph. You can check the table there. At -1, I needed a 0 at -2, not -1. Okay, so this one's out, which means my answer must be B, 2 only. So if you want to put that in your calculator, it will look just like that, but in interest of time, we don't have to. So we're putting all of them in y equals and checking the graph. Checking the zeros of the graph. All right? So it's still like a matching strategy. You take them and match them with what's in your calculator. No math required. All right, number 17, which trinomial is equivalent to? This one right here. So they use that word equivalent. Anytime you see the word equivalent, you can do the y1, y2 strategy, where I can put this into y1 and all my options into y2 to see if they match. Okay, that strategy will always work, I should say 99 times out of 100, when you see the word equivalent. We're gonna do the math behind this and then we'll check it using the strategy. So this one's tricky, a lot of room for error on this one, so follow with me with what I do. This first part of it says 3 parentheses x minus 2 squared. Remember, the only way you can solve this is to write out the parentheses twice if they're being squared, if it's a binomial squared. So it's gonna look like this. 3, and then you're gonna have 2 sets of parentheses there. X minus 2, x minus 2. That's how I unsquared that. And then minus 2 parentheses x minus 1. You're gonna need a lot of room, so you might wanna do the math up here. So I'm gonna rewrite the problem. 3 parentheses x minus 2, x minus 2, and then minus 2, x minus 1. All right. In this situation here, I have 3 things being multiplied together. You can either multiply in your 3 first and then FOIL everything here, or you can FOIL it first, then multiply the 3 in. I'll multiply this 3 into the first set of parentheses there, and then we'll FOIL. So it's gonna be 3x minus 6. Make sure you keep that in parentheses because that binomial has to be multiplied by this x minus 2 eventually, okay? And then we can go ahead and distribute in that -2. That's gonna be -2x plus 2, okay? And then from here, we can FOIL this first, inner, outer, last. 3x times x is 3x squared. 3x times -2 is -6x. -6 times x, -6x again. And then -6 times -2 is +12. And then drop down these guys, minus 2x plus 2. And then very carefully combine your like terms. So I have nothing to combine with my 3x squared, so that's just gonna get dropped down, which is a good sign because all these start with 3x squared. So I'm on the right track. Let's see, with my x's, I can combine -6 with another -6 with the -2. These are all getting more and more negative. That combines to -12 and then -14x. So I could say goodbye to a and b because those have -2x's there. And then the last thing I can combine is my 12 and my 2. Positive 12 plus 2 gives me positive 14. My answer is D. All right, the strategy here is how we're gonna check this. So we're gonna plug the original into y1 and answer D into y2. So it's gonna be a y1, y2, and find the match. Okay? So I'll show you what I mean. You probably are getting the hang of this by now, but plug it in really carefully. So 3 parentheses x minus 2 squared minus 2 parentheses x minus 1. that's your original, and then plug in what you got as an answer, 3x squared minus 14x plus 14, and your y values should match. If they don't, you either plugged it in wrong or you did something wrong. So that's another way to check your options, okay? You could have skipped all that math and just plugged each one in and found the match. That works too when it's multiple choice. All right, and the last one, 18. This notation is similar to notation that you've seen already, I believe, unless I'm lying to you. Okay, it's similar to the notation in number 1, question number 1, when it said g of x, or g of x, and then it said g of negative 3. So you gotta kind of remember what that means. This 18 is actually sequences, and we didn't get to the sequences unit, but you can answer this question knowing what you know already. So it says, which function defines the sequence, negative 6, negative 10, negative 14, and negative 18, where, and they give you this notation. So f of 6, we already know that means x equals 6. When it says f of 6 equals negative 26, that's like a coordinate. So x, if x is 6, they're saying when x is 6, y would be negative 26. So that's really the point 6, negative 26. And then if you notice here, your options are all different equations. These are all linear equations. So if I plug each one into my calculator, I'm going to be checking for not only this point, but also this sequence here. Okay, and I'm going to show you what I mean by that. We're going to plug in A. A is actually your correct answer. So I'm going to show you what I mean by A being the correct answer. So I'm going to plug in, remember f of x means y equals. I'm plugging in negative 4x minus 2. And then I'm going to check my table. So I'm first going to check my table for the point 6, negative 26, and there it is, 6, negative 26. But I also want to match it with my sequence, all right? My sequence, the first number of my sequence is negative 6. The second number is 10. The third number is negative 10, negative 14, and negative 18. 1, 2, 3, 4, these are my numbers. Look at your table. Look at question one, or number 1. And it matches with negative 6 as your first number there. Can you see that? 2 is negative 10. 3 is negative 14. 4 is negative 18. So that's how you know that's your sequence, okay? And that's how we know we have a match. So even though you didn't learn the sequence unit, you still can solve this problem using your calculator, all right? Especially when it's multiple choice. So for this one, the strategy is plug into your y equals and check your table. For your point and your sequence. All right. Okay, that's your multiple choice for today. Short answer for today. I would like to get through, if possible, I think we have time. Yeah, I'd like to get through question 4 and 5. We'll see what happens. I don't want this to go over 30 minutes, so we'll see what happens. But yesterday you guys, well, I shouldn't say yesterday, that was Tuesday, you guys did a square root function, number 3. We're going to do another square root function. This one has been transformed a little bit. So let's see if we can remember the transformations. So it's a square root function. You may be able to do this without me since you did one Tuesday with the video, hopefully. So this is going to be the same situation. The square root function has been transformed. It has a negative out front and a +3 on the inside. So for those of you who remember your transformation rules, I'm hoping you're all raising your hands at home, wanting to answer this question. The negative on the outside means it's been reflected over the x-axis, So instead of it going like this, like the normal way, it's gonna be going flipped over the x-axis. So yours is gonna look something like that. And then the +3 on the inside means left 3. So instead of starting at 0, 0, it's gonna start at over left 1, 2, 3, and then it's gonna go this way. So your function should look like this guy right here. All right? So let's go ahead and graph it and double check. Get your table ready. Make sure you always show your table of values. In your calculator, y equals, you're plugging in negative, you're using this negative symbol right here, negative, square root of x plus 3. Make sure the +3 is on the inside. You don't have to tab out there. and then go to your table. Go all the way up until you find your error. There it is. That's the most important point to plot, -3, 0. Okay, -3, 0. We're gonna plot -2, -1. I'm gonna skip to the nice numbers. 1, -2, 6, -3. And then I'm gonna plot as far right as I can go, which is 10, right? That goes to 10 on the X. So I'm gonna plot 10, -3.6. Oh, 6, okay. I'm gonna just estimate that point, just so that I can make sure it spans across the whole coordinate plane. So -3, 0 is gonna be my first point. -3, 1, 2, 3, up 0. There's your first point. -2, -1, over 2, down 1. Over 1 to the right, down 2. Over 6, down 3. 2, 4, 6, down 1, 2, 3. And then over 10 down 3.6, so it's just a little bit past 3.5 there, okay? Close to -4. And then you go ahead, when you connect these, you only do an arrow on the one side, on the right side here. Okay, remember, if I did an arrow this way, that was where the error occurred, so there's no points there, all right? So there she is, y equals negative the square root of x plus 3 for your square root function. All right, and we have plenty of time for number 5. So let's go ahead and do number 5. Number 5, notice what it says here. There's a lot of words here. This looks more like a reading problem than a math problem. So we should read it, of course, figure out what it's talking about, but then highlight the math, okay? There's a lot of words, but we want to highlight mainly the math here. So it says Alex launched a ball into the air. The height of the ball can be represented by the equation. Okay, there's some math, so I'm going to highlight that. Where h is the height in units, and they labeled that already for me, and they're just telling me, okay, well, that means the height. And t is the time in seconds. So we're talking about height in units, time in seconds, which I already have labeled, so that's good. After the ball was launched, graph the equation from t equals 0 to t equals 5. Okay, so we have to decide when I plug that in my calculator. Usually I have x and y, but now they're using t and h. Remember, it usually says y equals, and then it's usually x. Your x's are squared, right? So that means your x is really your t in this case, and your h, or your y is really your h in this case, okay? But your calculator is still going to show you x and y. So when they say graph it from where t is equal to 0 and t is equal to 5, that means our x values are going to go from 0 to 5, is all that means. Okay, so we're graphing these 6 points, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So let's go ahead and put that in our calculator. All we have to do is plug this guy in. Now, what type of function is this? It's a quadratic. How do we know that? Because I have a t squared, or really, usually we see x squared, but remember variables, it doesn't matter what letter they use. And it's negative out front. My t squared is negative, so that means it's going to be a frown face. It's going to flip upside down. Okay? I'm not actually going to have arrows here because they're telling me only to graph these 6 points, so it's going to be point to point, okay? We're just having 2 points on the end there, no arrows. So let's go ahead and put that in our calculators. -8 x squared plus 40x plus 5. All right, double check to make sure you put that in correctly, and go ahead to your table and graph the points, or at least record the points that they're giving you. So they gave us the point 0, 5, 1, 37, 2, 53, 3, 53, 4, 37, 5, 5. Okay, so these points are going to be, we have to do something additional, and you might already see why. Remember, when you graph a quadratic, you need to find the symmetry. You also need a vertex. Okay, my vertex is missing on this one, so I need to find it. It's going to be somewhere in between the middle here. So it's going to be 2.5 something. A little over 53. So let's go ahead and find the vertex. It's already in my calculator. To find the vertex, you go to Second, Calc. This one's gonna be a maximum because it's flipped upside down, remember? So it's gonna be your max point. Now, what happens when I look at my table, I can't see a vertex. Now, you really don't have to be able to see it in order to find it here, but if you want to, you can change your window to make your Y value go higher, right? My Y's are going up to 53, so let's change our window. My Y max, I need to be higher. I need it to be like 60. Okay, now let's do second trace or calc again. Go to your max. And now we should be able to see the top. Okay, so then you want to go left of your vertex. So we're a little left here, hit enter. Now scroll using your right arrow a little right of the vertex, hit enter, and then hit enter one more time. My number says 2.49. We round that to 2.5, guys. So 2.5 and then 55. Okay, so that's my vertex. You do need to graph that point. It's very important. Okay, especially because they ask us a question about it down here. So let's go ahead and graph this. Now, they did not scale it for me. I need to scale it. So my X values or my T values go from 0 to 5. So I have plenty of space here to skip, I would say, every 3. So I'm going to start at 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You could have skipped every 4. Make sure you space it out as much as you can. We don't want this to be a tiny little graph. All right, then I have to go up to 55. So let's see. Let's see if I counted by 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30, 35, 40, 45, 50, 55. Okay, you can probably space this out a little better than me, but you can count, each one can be worth 5. You could definitely space that out better and stretch it out more, but that's what I'm going to do for right now. So I'm going to skip every 2 and count by 10s. So each one's worth 5 because I'm skipping. And I can go up to 60, and that should be good. All right, let's go ahead and graph these points. So 0, 5, over 0, up 5. So that means Alex must have been 5 feet in the air when he launched this thing. Maybe he's 5 feet tall. Over 1, up 37 will be close to 40 there. Over 2, up 53. 2.5, so that's going to be right here, up 55. So that'll be right there. Over 3, up 53. Over 4, up 37. These should line up so it's easier to graph on the way back down. And over 5, up 5. Okay. And then, since they only wanted us to graph between 0 and 5, we can actually stop there. We don't have to connect it to the ground. You can if you want, but this is what it's going to look like. There, like that. And they said only graph from 0 to 5 seconds, so you don't have to connect it back down. All right, always label, get in the good habit of labeling all your math there. And then let's go ahead and answer this question down here. It says, state the coordinates of the vertex, which we have highlighted in yellow here, and explain the meaning and the context of the problem. Now remember, we just did this a couple days ago, where it says the context of the problem, so this was question 2, use the words they use when it says context of the problem. So we have to look at the words that they used. They used time in seconds for your X value or your T value, and they used height in units for your Y or your H value. So my vertex is the point, 2.5, comma 55. 2.5 is my X, 55 was my Y. X is your time in seconds, Y is your height. So what that means is you have to connect your number with your word. Connect your number with your word. So I didn't give you much room to write this, so I'm going to write it over here. So it says state the coordinates of the vertex. So that we have to do that first. So the vertex is 2.5, comma 55, which means at 2.5 what? Well, 2.5 was the time, so 2.5 seconds. The ball was, hopefully you can still read this, was 55, it says units, so I don't think it specifies that it's feet or anything like that. Let me just quickly, so we're just gonna say 55 units in the air. If you use the words they use, you cannot go wrong, okay? Don't make up words. Don't say it was feet, because it might not have been. If they just said units, so that's what we're gonna use, all right? Okay, guys, I hope you have a fabulous rest of your week, and I will be back with a video from the packets, probably every Tuesday and Thursday. You can expect that, okay? All right, Wits mail me with any questions. I will talk to you all soon. Bye-bye.